Hello, and thank you for joining the webinar. I'm Madison Lundquist, APQC's Principal Research Lead for Process and Performance Management. During this session, I'm going to cover the different areas of our recent framework survey: how to use a framework, how to apply and implement a framework, and the challenges and benefits of using a framework. Before we jump in, though, I want to cover a basic question. What is a framework? A framework lists what work gets done. It does not list how that work gets done. APQC's framework, the Process Classification Framework, more commonly known as the PCF, is just one example of a framework. Now, today's webinar focuses on the use of frameworks in general, not exclusively the PCF. According to survey data, 3 out of every 4 organizations use a framework, with the majority of respondents using APQC's PCF. The next most popular frameworks are custom frameworks, ITIL, and SCORE. We also asked organizations that have been using the PCF how long they have been using it. And our analysis found that the longer an organization has used the PCF, the more likely they are to say that it adds value to their processes. For example, 96% of those who have used it for 10 or more years say that they strongly agree that it's improved their processes, compared to about 2/3 of those who have used it for less than a year say they strongly agree that it adds value. Now, something I like to do is look at our survey data year over year. And when looking at this data, the trends are in line with their 2023 data, but lower than the total number of people that noted using a framework in 2021 and 2019, 85% in those years versus about 75% this year. We also asked on our survey about what type of selection criteria organizations look at when picking a framework. In 2025, organizations noted similar criteria to that in 2023, with the exception of alignment with processes and business software that's already in use. Now, the rise in popularity for this criterion makes sense given the emerging tools and technology, AI, etc. It's the first time that this criterion has appeared in the top 5. Now, generally, when selecting a framework, you want to ask yourself these 3 questions. 1, does it have the level of detail that I need? 2, does it include additional information I need for my process work? And 3, does it include all the functional and industry-related processes that I'm focused on? Now, I want to note here that APQC also has a variety of industry-specific process frameworks available, so be sure to check those out if you need them. Once you have your framework, you have to figure out how you're going to manage it. And organizations tend to manage their framework in a variety of ways, with the most popular being a Microsoft Office product or document, according to our survey. Now, this has stayed consistent since our 2023 survey. However, a variation in this data came up when I looked at how process management maturity affected the use of frameworks. Now, data found that those who are more mature were most likely to manage their framework in an ERP platform. About 40% of those who considered themselves most mature versus only 18% at the lowest end of the maturity scale. And I want to pause here real quick and let you know that if you go to our collection for the 2025 survey, we have a ton of data cuts in there. So you can look at data cuts by industry, organization size, either by revenue or FTEs. I also have one in there about the maturity levels. There's also one where you can look at the year-over-year comparison. So there's a link at the end of this survey to that content, or at the end of this webinar to that content collection. So be sure to check that out. Now, looking at the responses for those that use the PCF specifically, organizations are more likely to adopt the framework in silos or by one or more business units or organization-wide. Further analysis found that organization-wide adoption was more likely in organizations with a more mature process management program. Additionally, Organizations that have framework adoption at an organization-wide level are more likely to say that their process management efforts are effective or very effective. 80% of our respondents say that compared to 61% of those who adopt at the individual level or 46% of those who adopt in silos. Now moving into the next section on applying a framework. This slide compares the last 4 surveys. Now note that process discovery has less emphasis in 2023 and 2025 than it has in 2021 and 2019. Performance improvement and process discovery are consistently the top 2 focuses when applying a framework, with process improvement being more important as of late. You can also see that technology implementation is on a slow upward trend. Looking at the data, organizations leverage process frameworks like the PCF to identify current processes, build their process maps or models, create those process definitions, and document business capabilities. Rather than inventing processes out of thin air, process frameworks provide that ready-made library of processes and process definitions that help to turbocharge process discovery and standardization activities. Now, you'll be able to access a copy of these slides to reference all these resources linked, and throughout the presentation, you'll see this slide or slides much like this that have links to resources in the resource library. I just wanted to have these there for you so you could further your learning on these different topics and help jumpstart your framework work. Organizations apply process frameworks and process improvement efforts to manage those efforts themselves, identify process measures and KPIs, as well as audit the current processes. Now, remember, the goal of process management is to improve performance. Whether an organization wants to improve cycle times, boost employee satisfaction, or any other goal, organizations engage in process management to improve something. But without that structured approach to improvement, organizations risk making those fragmented or random acts of improvement that may look good initially, but are often unsustainable and even damaging to upstream and downstream processes. Process frameworks help the organizations to enhance those improvement opportunities. Now, many organizations face challenges with technology implementations, especially when process models are undefined. In ERP implementations, technology providers often impose their architecture, which may not align with the business's needs. This misalignment leads to costly customizations, complicating upgrades, and sometimes requires a second implementation. To mitigate these risks and costs, businesses should establish process frameworks and governance before adopting the new technology to ensure that efficiency and effectiveness they're hoping for. Survey participants noted that they use the framework when implementing those new technologies by supporting their process automation efforts, taking that inventory of their current IT applications, as well as building those process libraries for the ERP implementation itself. Now, let's move on to discuss how organizations are implementing a framework. We asked survey participants what steps they use when implementing a framework, and the top 2 were to document and standardize, as well as improve processes. And these are in line with the applications of process frameworks question as well. Maps and process documentation tangibly demonstrate how processes occur and how that work happens. As we talked about at the beginning of the webinar, a framework serves as that starting point for organizations so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. Organizations will utilize process frameworks, sort of like a list of ingredients that they can put together a meal or a process with. The definitions available for each element allow organizations to use a common language to talk about what work is being done. And when organizations begin to map and visualize how their processes flow and interact, the organization can better coordinate improvement projects, choose measures, resolve conflicts, and more. And most directly, maps help reveal those non-value added tasks that are happening. However, note that it's important not to map every single process in the organization. The key point here is relevant. And you may be wondering, well, how do I know which processes are relevant? Some organizations will use criteria such as, does the process involve risk? Does it affect our day-to-day operations? Or does it include mission critical tasks? Think about that when you're trying to decide which processes are relevant. Moving into the second most used implementation step is using it to improve your processes. Now, when it comes to process improvement, organizations typically start with understanding what's actually happening, the current state, identifying the to be state, and prioritizing those opportunities based on that clear selection criteria. And a current state assessment helps provide that baseline for process improvements and performance management, as well as engages employees to think in process terms. Methods for assessing the current state of an organization vary depending on how much information you have available, how mature is your business process management, and the amount of employee engagement that's necessary. And I outlined the three common approaches, survey, interview, workshop here for assessing the current state. Although these three approaches are outlined individually here, they're most often conducted in a combination of some sort. And it's important to consider what goal you're actually trying to achieve with your current state assessment, the amount of buy-in that's necessary, or simply the time that you have to complete the task. And that will help you pick which method is best for you. So let's move into the last section for this webinar, challenges and benefits organizations realize when using a framework. So looking here, trends have actually stayed the same over the last 4 surveys. Most of the challenges that organizations face have little to nothing to do with the framework itself. Instead, the challenges tend to fall in 2 evergreen areas, buy-in and engagement, and alignment and purpose. The biggest challenge in adoption are related to engaging those already overburdened staff to overcome resistance through better communication on value and providing those tangible or intangible incentives for participation. Rewards and recognition can include that formal and informal incentives that encourage specific behaviors or performance. They can include pay and formal bonuses and incentives, as well as non-monetary recognition and expression of thanks. But remember that different people respond to different incentives. So it's important to incorporate a range of monetary and non-monetary forms. Incorporating desired behaviors into a performance review is key. This communicates the message that new behaviors are a required function of the job, not optional. Change management is super important, and the communication that goes along with change encompasses the approaches and tools used to explain that change to staff, how you're going to collect and incorporate feedback from them, set expectations, and even cultivate their buy-in. Some different tools can include emails, town halls, forums, videos, and even social media. Our change management research found that organizations are more successful whenever they create a phased communication plan, they emphasize transparency and communication about the change, and they use an array of communication methods. Speaking of engagement, looking at research again from our change management project, engagement is an important piece of any change initiative, and this is a snippet from one of our key drivers of change infographic series. Now, similar to the points in this graphic, for your next framework implementation project, consider APQC's change management process. First, you got to plan it, then you have to design, implement, and sustain. It's important to communicate with the employees during the journey. Tell them what's going to change. Tell them when the change is coming, and be sure to support them through the change. The last piece in this graphic on the screen, shifting the culture, is an important factor to consider in any and every change initiative. Changing the culture or ensuring the change is sustainable truly helps with the success of your implementation efforts. Now, organizations find it difficult sometimes to work cross functionally on process efforts due to organizational silos. And without that strong collaboration, process efforts are not going to show a full picture and are going to lack a clear purpose. Organizations should work closely with cross functional business units to create parameters on what processes are going to be prioritized and how those efforts are going to support organizational goals. Silos, however, prevent groups across the enterprise from collaborating towards those common goals, like process improvement and innovation. The good news is that there are several effective strategies and approaches for breaking down silos. For example, value stream mapping. It can help include the flow of information and materials and allows organizations to document high-level process steps in an end-to-end process, taking that holistic view of how to drive customer value and eliminate waste throughout the process. Second, you can create shareable documents that define jargon and acronyms, or try to avoid them altogether. It's important to address this challenge in some form to help break down silos created by language barriers. And third, work together on a common strategy or a set of goals is also a powerful way to break down silos between groups. And here are a few ways you could do that. You could highlight cross-company goals, you could initiate shared improvement efforts, or conduct process improvement walks and organize by work cells. Now, even though frameworks or using frameworks come with challenges, there are, of course, benefits that organizations realize. And when we asked our survey participants what those were, they noted these top 5 benefits. Transparency and clarified communications are important benefits that they realize when using a framework. And these benefits can help drive the bottom 3 benefits, which include establishing buy-in, reducing operational silos, and reducing redundant processes. Now, we have a ton of content in our resource library to help you use process frameworks, how you apply them, adapt them, how other organizations have used frameworks, and more. So be sure to check out the links in our resource library or even explore some of our self-paced online training courses. And we have future webinars and roundtables posted on our event calendar online, so be sure to check those out. Also, don't forget to connect with us on social media. It's where we post upcoming events, new research, survey opportunities, and more. Thank you for joining the webinar today. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.